Ridgewood Estates looks like something out of a real estate brochure. Wide streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, pristine sidewalks, and houses that all seem to follow the same beige and white aesthetic. It's the kind of neighborhood where people smile at you in passing but lock their doors a little faster when they see you walking by at night. I grew up here. Well, not exactly here, but in this very spot, back before the HOA took over and turned the place into an exclusive, gated community. My grandpa, Arthur Johnson, built our house with his own two hands back in the late 60s, back when this land was just open fields and a few scattered homes. Now, our house, one of the last truly original ones, sticks out among the cookie-cutter mansions like a relic of a past these people would rather forget. Most days, I don't mind. I've got a good life here. I work remotely, take care of Grandpa, and keep to myself. But lately, there's been an itch at the back of my mind, a feeling like something's shifting beneath the surface. The kind of shift that happens right before a storm. I notice it first in the little things. A letter from the HOA, requesting an updated copy of our property deed. Strange, since nothing has changed in decades. The way the neighbors glance at us just a little too long before looking away. And then there's Margaret Langley. She's the HOA president. Sharp bob, expensive perfume, a face frozen in an expression of polite concern. She's the type who never raises her voice, but somehow makes every word sound like a warning. She's never liked us. Never said it outright, but it's always been there in the way she speaks to us, just a little too slow, just a little too careful. This morning, as I step outside to grab the mail, I see her standing on the sidewalk in front of our house, clipboard in hand. My stomach tightens. "Ezra," she calls out, her voice crisp, professional. I force a smile. "Morning, Margaret. Something I can help you with?" She glances at our front porch, where Grandpa is sitting in his usual chair, sipping his morning coffee. His eyes are on her, calm but unreadable. "We're doing a routine audit of property records," she says, flipping through her papers. "And there seems to be an issue with yours." I frown. "An issue?" She gives me a tight-lipped smile. "Your grandfather's residency." A strange, cold feeling creeps into my chest. "What about it?" "Well," she sighs, as if explaining something obvious, "we don't have official documentation proving that Arthur Johnson is legally a family member of the current homeowner." The words hang between us, thick with unspoken meaning. I laugh, a sharp, incredulous sound. "You're saying I need to prove my own grandfather's family?" Margaret doesn't blink. "It's just a formality. But I already know this is something more. And whatever it is, it's only just beginning." I shut the door harder than necessary, my grip tightening around the HOA letter. Inside, Grandpa sits at the kitchen table, calmly stirring his coffee like he didn't just hear Margaret Langley question his right to live in his own home. I slap the letter onto the table. "They want proof that you're my grandfather." Grandpa exhales through his nose, shaking his head. I knew this was coming. My stomach twists. "What do you mean, new?" He leans back in his chair, studying me. "Been feeling it for a while now." Looks, whispers. "Folks trying to rewrite history. They see us as a problem that needs fixing." I think back to the last few weeks, the extra HOA notices, the new rules being pushed about property upkeep, and the sudden rise in complaints about our house being out of harmony with the neighborhood's aesthetic. I thought it was just the usual HOA nonsense. But now I'm not so sure. I pull up the HOA website, scrolling through recent meeting minutes. Nothing specific about Grandpa, but a new amendment proposal catches my eye. Residency verification policy, ensuring all homeowners and residents meet the community's ownership requirements. It sounds harmless enough, but I know exactly what this is. A way to target us. A knock on the door snaps me back. I open it to find Margaret standing there again, flanked by two other HOA board members, Mr. Whitaker, an older man who always looks like he's smelling something unpleasant, and Linda Marks, the type who nods along to whatever Margaret says. Margaret's smile is tight, rehearsed. "I wanted to follow up, Ezra. Just to clarify, this isn't about you personally. It's about policy." I fold my arms. "Uh-huh. And how many other families are being asked for DNA tests?" Whitaker clears his throat. "It's a routine measure. I let out a sharp breath.
Bull.
You don't like that my grandpa's been here longer than any of you. You don't like that this house isn't one of your carbon copy builds. And you sure as hell don't like who lives here. Margaret stiffens. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? I step forward, lowering my voice. Because it feels a lot like you're trying to push us out. Linda shifts uncomfortably, but Margaret doesn't flinch. The board will be discussing the new verification policy next week, she says coolly. If you'd like to contest it, you're welcome to attend. I can hear the challenge beneath her words. Try to fight us. See what happens. I watch them leave, my pulse hammering in my ears. This isn't just about some paperwork. They're laying the groundwork for something bigger. And I need to find out exactly what. The next morning, I'm in Grandpa's study, sifting through decades of paperwork, property deeds, tax records, anything proving what we already know. He built this house, he owns this land, and he damn well belongs here. Looking for a smoking gun? Grandpa asks from the doorway, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. Something like that. I glance up. They're up to something, Grandpa.
It's not just about you.
They're pushing this new verification policy, and I guarantee we won't be the only ones targeted. Grandpa sighs, settling into his worn leather chair. I've seen this play before, boy. Dress it up however they want, it's still the same thing. They don't want us here. I swallow the anger rising in my throat. Well, they're not getting what they want. Armed with documents, I march straight to the HOA office, a small, glass-paneled building nestled between a fancy cafe and a boutique real estate agency. Inside, Margaret sits at her desk, flipping through paperwork with the smug air of someone who's already won. She doesn't even look up. Ezra, what a surprise. I slap the property deed onto her desk.
Here.
Written proof that my grandfather has owned this land longer than Ridgewood Estates has existed. She glances at it, unimpressed. Ezra, this isn't about property ownership. It's about residency verification. I grit my teeth. Which is just a fancy way of saying you don't believe my grandfather is really my grandfather. She leans back, folding her hands neatly. Rules exist for a reason. If we don't verify residency, then anyone could claim familial ties to bypass ownership requirements. You mean black families? I say coldly. Margaret's expression remains neutral, but I see it. The flicker of irritation, the momentary tightening of her jaw. The board will decide, she says finally.
I lean in.
I'll be at that meeting. And when I prove what you're doing, I hope you're ready for the fallout. Margaret just smiles. The pushback. I spend the next few days knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, gathering support. Some avoid my gaze, offering weak excuses about just following the rules.
But a few stand with me.
Mrs. Patel, the elderly woman down the street, pulls me aside. Margaret's been talking, she whispers, saying your grandfather's house was never legally part of Ridgewood Estates. That it was a clerical error that let him stay all these years. My stomach twists. That's what they're planning. They're going to say he was never supposed to be here at all. I need proof. Digging deeper, I find something Margaret doesn't want me to see. A buried land transfer dispute from decades ago. Her family once tried to seize this land from Grandpa through shady means, but he fought back and won in court. Now, she's trying to rewrite history. They want to erase him. Erase us. The breaking point. The day of the HOA meeting, the room is packed. More people than usual, some curious, some nervous, and a handful I know are here to watch a spectacle. Margaret sits at the front, flanked by Whitaker and Linda. She clears her throat, voice smooth as ever. Before we begin, I'd like to formally address the proposed residency verification policy, which ensures that all homeowners meet Ridgewood Estates requirements. I stand up. Let's talk about why you're pushing this policy. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Margaret's expression hardens. Ezra, if you have a concern, you'll have your turn to speak. Oh, I have plenty to say. I step forward, holding up the documents. Like how this so-called policy is just a way to target black families. How your own family tried to steal this land from my grandfather decades ago, and now you're trying again.
Gasps.
A shift in the room. Margaret's face goes pale. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it? I turn to the crowd. How many of you have been asked to prove your family ties? Silence. Whitaker clears his throat. This isn't about race, it's about. I cut him off. It's always about race when it's people like us being singled out. A tense, suffocating pause. Then Mr. Carter, another black homeowner, stands up.
He's right.
I got a letter too. My brother's been living with me for 2 years, and now suddenly I have to prove he's related to me. A ripple of agreement spreads. More people start murmuring, voices rising. Margaret's mask slips for just a second, just long enough for me to see the panic in her eyes. I press forward. I have the proof. Historical records. Legal disputes. This land has always belonged to my grandfather, and your family has been trying to take it from him for years. Margaret stiffens. That's a gross mischaracterization. I slam the papers onto the table. Then explain this. She doesn't move. Because she can't. The room is shifting, turning against her. And this is only the beginning. Margaret recovers quickly. She smooths down her crisp blazer, squares her shoulders, and gives the room one of her well-rehearsed smiles, the kind that usually makes people fall in line. There seems to be a misunderstanding, she says, her voice as controlled as ever. The residency verification policy is simply about ensuring Ridgewood Estates maintains its integrity. No one is being singled out. A scoff echoes from the back of the room. Mr. Carter folds his arms, shaking his head. Then why is it only black families getting these letters? Margaret ignores him. She turns to me, eyes gleaming like she's already won. Ezra, I understand this is emotional for you, but rules are rules. If you can't provide sufficient proof, then your grandfather's residency will be deemed invalid. Gasps ripple through the audience. My blood runs cold. You mean to tell me, I say, slow and deliberate, that after living in this house for over 50 years, you're threatening to kick my grandfather out? Margaret spreads her hands, feigning regret. I don't make the rules. The board does. I glance at the other board members. Whitaker won't meet my eyes. Linda looks uncomfortable but stays silent. Cowards, both of them. Margaret keeps going, voice syrupy sweet. Now, if you'd like to submit to a DNA test, we can resolve this quickly. Otherwise, I'm afraid. She pauses, letting the weight of her words settle. Your grandfather will need to vacate the property within 30 days. A heavy silence blankets the room. I let out a slow breath.
Keep your cool. She wants you to react.
Instead, I smile. Margaret falters. Interesting, I say. Because I did some digging of my own. Her eyes flicker with something, hesitation, maybe even fear, but she recovers. I'm sure whatever you found isn't relevant to. I cut her off. Oh, I think it's very relevant. I hold up a stack of papers. This is a record of a land dispute from 40 years ago. Seems your family tried to seize my grandfather's land through a fraudulent zoning claim. A wave of murmurs. Margaret's mask cracks, just a little. I press on. And here, I lift another document. A letter from your own grandfather trying to force my grandpa out under the guise of neighborhood improvement. Sound familiar? Margaret's mouth tightens. That has nothing to do with. Oh, but it does. I step closer. Because you're doing the exact same thing. You failed then, so now you're using the HOA to try again. I hold up the final piece, an email chain. See, I was curious about this new verification policy, so I reached out to the county clerk. Imagine my surprise when I found emails between you and a private developer discussing how to remove problem properties to make room for higher-value residents. The room explodes.
People gasp.
Someone shouts. Is that true? Margaret's face goes bone white. I push the papers onto the table. Looks like you weren't just targeting my family. You were planning to erase multiple families, just to drive up property values. A beat of silence. Then Mr. Carter stands. You were trying to steal our homes? Margaret scrambles for control. This is ridiculous. I don't let her finish. I also forwarded everything to a lawyer. My smile sharpens. And a few journalists. Her breath catches. Now she knows. She's already lost. Margaret's face is a mask of barely contained panic. The whispers in the room have turned into outright accusations. People are no longer murmuring behind their hands. They're talking openly, angrily. This is corruption, someone shouts. Were you planning to push all of us out? Another neighbor demands. Margaret raises her hands, trying to regain control. Everyone, please, let's not jump to conclusions. This is all just a misunderstanding. I cross my arms. A misunderstanding? So you're saying these emails, where you explicitly discuss removing Black homeowners from Ridgewood Estates, aren't real? She swallows hard. I don't know where you got those, but they're taken out of context. I let out a dry laugh. Oh, because I also happen to have a recording. Margaret freezes. Across the room, Mrs. Patel stands, holding up her phone. I recorded our last HOA meeting, she says, her voice firm. You told Mr. Whitaker that certain elements in the neighborhood needed to be, how did you put it, phased out. A hush falls over the room. Margaret turns to Whitaker, eyes pleading. You know what I meant, don't you? But Whitaker, now sensing the tide turning against her, leans away. His face is pale with fear. I never agreed to anything illegal. Margaret whips back toward me. You're blowing this way out of proportion. This neighborhood has standards. We were just trying to keep it from declining. Declining? I echo, my voice low and dangerous. By kicking out Black homeowners? By rewriting history to erase my family's right to be here? Margaret shakes her head violently. That's not. It was never about race. It was about property values. I was protecting everyone's investments. Even if it meant lying? I counter. Even if it meant stealing homes from families who've lived here for generations? Margaret's mouth opens and closes, but she has no answer. Then the doors swing open. A tall man in a county inspector's uniform strides in, flanked by 2 police officers. The room falls into stunned silence. Margaret's hands tremble as she turns to them. Dubbish, what is this? The inspector ignores her, addressing the room. I'm here on behalf of the county's Zoning and Ethics Committee. We received a tip-off about potential fraudulent land reassignment attempts within Ridgewood Estates. His gaze settles on Margaret. We reviewed emails, meeting notes, and official complaints. And Ms. Langley, your name is all over them. Margaret stumbles back. This is absurd. The officer steps forward. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. The color drains from her face.
No,
I haven't done anything wrong. The inspector flips through a folder. According to these records, you've been working with outside developers to push illegal policy changes that would result in multiple evictions, all under the guise of neighborhood standards. He shakes his head. That's more than an HOA violation. That's fraud. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Margaret spins toward Whitaker and Linda. You knew. You both knew. Whitaker, now desperate to save himself, stammers, I never approved anything. This was your plan. Linda, looking like she might throw up, nods. You were the one handling all the paperwork. Margaret's breath comes in short gasps.
No,
you can't do this to me. I built this HOA. I run this neighborhood. The officer moves forward. Not anymore. Margaret lets out a broken, hysterical laugh. You can't arrest me. This is my community. I am Ridgewood Estates. She turns to the crowd, desperate. You all know I was just doing what was best. But the looks she gets aren't ones of sympathy. They're of disgust, betrayal, fury. Even her most loyal supporters, those who once stood by her, nodding along to her rules and regulations, now look away. Because the truth is out. And Margaret Langley?
she's finished.
The officers escort her toward the door. She jerks against their hold, screeching, You'll regret this. You think this is over? You think you've won? I step forward, meeting her wild, furious eyes. Oh, I know I've won, I say. And as the officers haul her out of the building, the entire room, my neighbors, my allies, begin to clap. Margaret Langley is all over the news by morning. HOA President accused of fraudulent evictions. Racial discrimination scandal rocks Ridgewood Estates. Illegal land grab uncovered. Homeowners fight back. Her mugshot flashes across the screen, her once perfectly composed face now hollow-eyed and defeated. The news anchor details the charges: fraud, conspiracy, and racial discrimination violations. The county is launching a full-scale investigation into her dealings, and her assets are frozen pending legal action. It's over. And the best part? She did it to herself. Reclaiming our home. A week later, I step onto Grandpa's front porch, the scent of cut grass and magnolias filling the warm air. The weight that's been pressing on my chest for weeks is finally gone. Grandpa rocks in his chair, watching the sun dip behind the trees. "You did good, boy," he says, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Real good." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "I just made sure the truth got out." He chuckles, his deep, rumbling laugh filling the space between us. "Truth don't mean nothing if you don't have the courage to speak it." He taps his cane against the wood. "You spoke it, loud enough for the whole damn world to hear." I glance at the street.
Something's changed.
Neighbors I've barely exchanged words with before now wave when they pass. A few even stop to talk. Mrs. Patel brings over fresh-baked samosas. Mr. Carter invites me to a neighborhood cookout. Even Whitaker, who always stood on the sidelines, benefiting from Margaret's schemes, stammers out an apology. Not everyone is remorseful. Some people stay quiet, pretending they never supported Margaret. But the fear is gone. People aren't afraid to call things out anymore. And that's real change. The final blow. A few days later, I get a call. A journalist from a major news network wants to interview me. Margaret's trial will be huge, she says. People want to hear from those she targeted. I hesitate, thinking of Grandpa, of the generations before us who never got justice. Then I say, I'll do it. Because this story, it needs to be told. The last word. That night, I sit with Grandpa on the porch again. He hands me an old, yellowed piece of paper, his original deed to the house. His signature is bold, defiant. "You keep this," he says. "Proof that no matter what they try, we belong here." I grip the paper tight, feeling its history, its weight. Margaret Langley thought she could erase us. She thought wrong.